Heather, how you doing?
Oh, awesome. How are you?
I'm doing great. I'm doing great. The first question is actually more of a question of kind of going in between. Where are you located? And the second question is, like, how has been the pandemic going for you?
I am on Vancouver Island in Canada, and the pandemic has been definitely challenging, I think, as it has been for most people. A big thing here has been, access to healthcare and things like that have definitely been challenging because it's been such a change from how things used to be.
Yep. And in terms of like how much like the some of the thinking I have behind that question is, like how much it has impacted, like kind of the isolation of people, the like at some level, some even depression.
Yeah.
Have you felt any of that?
Yeah, for sure. So I was struggling with depression for a long time before the pandemic, and I was receiving fairly intensive outpatient psychiatric services, which were all disrupted by the pandemic. And yeah,
Yeah.
just that isolation and the lack of access to my doctors and therapists did definitely contribute to the depression, which ultimately culminated in me being hospitalized for psychiatric care back at the beginning of the pandemic in the spring of 2020.
So right at the beginning, you end up, like receiving services from, for mental health.
Yes, yeah, in June of 2020.
Wow. So like it can't be, like it can be at, it can be at worst times, right? Like like everyone is just freaking out at that time, and um,
Yeah.
with distanciation, like you can't bring any of your, the relatives or the the friends with you, so you end up, kind of going there alone, right?
Yeah, yeah, which is not really something you want to have happen when you're in the hospital. You kind of want to lean on your friends and family. You want somebody,
Exactly.
sitting
Yeah.
in that visitor's chair next to the bed, and there was none of that.
Ugh, that's crazy.
Yeah.
That's crazy. My mom passed literally in March
Oh, no.
of 2020, and it was like early enough so that like no one really knew what to do with us. Like they just kind of were saying, well, it has to be, I don't know, like 15 people, and then it was like, oh no, but 10 people, and then it was like they didn't know how to react. Like they just didn't know,
Yeah.
um and it was just it was a bit of like all over the place. And then like like my mom was my father's 70, he was 70 years old, like so it was more of the nature of us trying to be careful.
Yeah.
But like my uncle, which closer to 80 years old, would just go like, fucking hug me, like I was like, well, I shouldn't, like it was really really weird.
Yeah, that's
um
challenging because different people have different levels of comfort, and I know some, like, elderly people were super scared of it, and then others were like, "Well, I don't have that long to live anyway, so just let me
exactly.
live my life," kind
Exactly.
of.
Yeah, 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 and it was really weird, like, because, like, we were doing this for them, like, it was just like, well, I'm trying to do this, because I kinda don't know what's going on, and they were like, "No, no, no, but, like, stop," like, I was like, "Well," like, I wanna really be careful about that, like, anyways. Um, the other thing is, you like like there's a sense of closure that you really want, but at the same time, you don't want to hurt and you don't want to, so yeah, it was a weird, really weird situation.
Yeah, yeah, I can imagine, and all the recommendations were changing every day probably for the number of visitors and things like that you could have, so or even for a
Exactly.
funeral service, it was 50 people, and then it was 10, and then it was none, and
Exactly. And it was just like, okay, well, we really don't know. It's like, should we wear a mask? And they were like, we're not sure about the mask yet, like, so. And so some people would come with gloves and masks, and some other were just like, well, like, no, like, I'm not going to do that. And much later, they, like, not too much later, actually, they actually told us that, again, mask thing and all that. But like, it was really early to kind of impose anything. And like, you saw that the even the like, the funeral place was just like, "Oof, you don't know, like, so
Yeah.
let's, use the fact that, like, we don't know, to have the ceremony, and and then move on. And it was really weird.
Yeah, there was just so much uncertainty and chaos, really.
Yeah, yeah. um let's start with, like, kind of the beginning of it all. Like, I usually ask my guests to um kind of rewind back their life story tape to some of the first marking event in their lives. Like, so it's either, like, when I talk to, like, people that suffered or suffers from addiction, like, it sometimes is, like, their own first use, or like, seeing someone else use that has impacted their lives looking back. um where would you bring me back, Heather, like, at that, early moment in your life that kind of defined who you became, and who, like, the life that you had?
Yeah, I think probably starting around 3, my dad had cancer, and then he left shortly after, he was in remission, so that was definitely an effect. And I think around that time, I started really realizing that people viewed me as different, and that, even adults were uncomfortable around me. So it was getting that like self awareness. I remember playing on the playground once with this kid. I was probably about 5, and he was a couple years older. And we were playing all afternoon. We were the only 2 kids there. And all of a sudden he looked at me and he went, "Why don't you ever look at anything?" And I told him very matter of factly, "I'm blind, like I have brown hair and blue eyes, no big deal," kind of thing, because at the time, you're a kid and you're kind of surrounded by your little bubble, so you don't really realize that you are different.
How
And
old
he
were you
reacted.
when that happened?
I was 5.
Okay. And
Yeah.
it may sound like a weird question, but does someone tell you that you are blind, or how, because you're born like that, right?
Yeah.
Does
Mm,
someone tell you, like, what I'm saying? Like, it may seem like a, because, like, if it's an accident or you lose your sight, I mean, like, that human beings see. But when you're born like that, like, how, like, how do you happen to realize that, like, you, you can't see?
yeah, that's a really interesting question. I think it was not something that was never talked about. It was just kind of, always there in the background, so I would hear about it and things like that. But it wasn't until I met that kid on the playground, and he actually reacted really badly. He pushed me off the top of the slide and went down the slide, and made some comment about me being a blind bozo, and then got on his bike and pedaled away as fast as he could. So it was like this really negative first experience with really realizing. So I think I knew at that point beforehand that I was blind, that people saw things that I didn't, but it was neither positive nor negative. It was just something that was no different than being
Yeah.
born with brown hair and blue eyes.
Wow. And it, and so that actually was literally the first time that someone makes you feel bad for being blind, actually.
Yeah, yeah, I remember laying there and kind of everything just sort of clicked into place, like a million little moments that I had lived with other people before that, that I'd never really put together. And all of a sudden, it was this realization of, I am different. People see me as different, and this is forever. I can't fix it.
Shit. Wh- what kind of kid were you? Were you like the, kind of the little daredevil? Like, um, what kind of kid were you? Like, you're saying that, like, you were actually playing on the playground, and, like, having fun with, other kids. Were you kind of outgoing? Um, like like kind of like little social beasts, like yeah.
Yeah, up until elementary school for sure, I was super outgoing and I would do everything that anybody else did. I, wouldn't let even if they told me no, I would just do it anyways kinda thing, and, I've talked to my mom about that because a lot of parents of kids with disabilities tend to sort of keep them in this bubble wrap kind of situation and don't really let them fall and get back up by themselves. And my mom kinda said to me, like, "Well, even if we'd wanted to, we wouldn't have been able to with you. You wouldn't have let us do that." So I was just very determined that I was going to do everything that my brother did, everything that my cousins did, everything that my friends were doing. I couldn't see why I shouldn't do it.
How much of that, like you said, up until elementary school, how much of that changed when, like when you got to school?
A lot of it changed because I think around the time that I met that kid on the playground, other kids started noticing as well, and I think having that interaction with that kid also just made me more self-aware of it, and then I noticed that adults were uncomfortable around me, and I think I kind of just withdrew into myself because I I don't know, it made me uncomfortable that other people were uncomfortable with me, so I just became less social and tried my hardest to make everybody comfortable around me because then I would be comfortable too. But when I couldn't achieve that, then it was just this like constant failure.
That's crazy, like because like like there's a lot of like the people that I talk to, like they can actually, like they can change things, but you
Hmm.
can't. Like like it's again, like it, you can come back to like to kind of like the only thing you can change is the attitudes towards the situation, but at the same time, like you probably at that time don't have yet the like the maturity um to understand that, right?
Yeah, no, exactly. So after that day on the playground, I made this promise to myself that I would never let anybody see that I was blind ever again, which obviously didn't work, but I didn't realize that as a kid. So I would like go through all my books and everything and read books about different characters and really study their body language and try to almost mimic it so that I could look like a sighted person too. And it didn't work, obviously. And that was really frustrating for me. So every time somebody, made a comment about me being blind, I just would be like, okay, I have to work harder because I'm still showing it. So I have to keep reading these books, keep studying, keep doing everything I can so that nobody will be able to tell.
Ugh, but that must be, like that's a fucking nightmare.
Yeah, it was exhausting and you never win that battle.
No, because like, and you probably get reminded by people being kind to you or being, like like to give you attention, and you're like, well, fuck your attention, like like I don't want it to show. I mean, like it's kind of a ironic, messed up situation where like you can't really like because people, like I would say that the majority of human beings want to do good, right? Like so,
Mhm.
like if you feel, like if, like so even with good intention, it would probably hurt you at the time.
Yes, yeah, because I would know that they knew and I would wonder what I was doing wrong.
Wow. And so w- how does that grow into you? How did, like, I mean, do you become like that, like almost like that antisocial, individual? Do you, like how do you, like how does that pain grows into you?
Yeah, it manifested in social anxiety at a really young age. So by the time I was 7, I would be getting sent home from school all the time because I would be like sick to my stomach and I hope things are changing now, but at the time, my parents would take me to the pediatrician and things like that, and they would just kinda be like, "Oh, she's an anxious kid, she'll grow out of it," which is really unfortunate because that's, the ideal time when you're a kid that those patterns can really be changed, and then I think the anxiety by my early teens led to depressions and feelings of, "I don't wanna do this anymore."
And what kind of effects does it have on your academic progress?
I was very academic, that wasn't really an issue for me. It was definitely a struggle because I think what people don't realize is the lack of access that people who are blind often face. So I often wouldn't have textbooks, or class notes, things like that. I couldn't get them in braille in time. I didn't have a calculator for math, so they just said, "Well, do it in your head," which, by the time you're doing high school math, that's pretty challenging. So it was it was a challenge in that way, but I was able to keep being very academic throughout my school.
And were you at regular school with, like, kind of, yeah? So
Yes.
all you had is, like, supplemental tools to help you
Yeah.
progress through it.
Yeah, basically, there was just a lot of I think it's getting better too because of technology now, but when I was growing up, there was either braille or books on tape, and it was very difficult to get either one of those things.
Yeah, and you need to learn Braille,
Yes.
which, like, you have no point of comparison, but, like, this must be a challenging task.
It was challenging because there was nobody there to teach me braille. So, basically, my educational assistant would do the course at the same time I was doing the course and just be, like, one lesson ahead of me and try to teach me that way. So she was incredible, but she didn't really know, what she was doing either. So it's, like getting taught to read by somebody who doesn't actually know how to read.
Damn. And so, fuck, how does that, like, kind of, social anxiety grows as well? Like, does it make you, like, in terms of, like, the does it grow into a depression? Does it, like, how does it grow?
Yeah, I think it kind of grew into this perfectionism of when I'm outside of my house, I have to be perfect all the time because if I'm not, then people will doubt my capabilities even more than they already do. Because that's a big struggle that we face is that people think that we are incompetent. And so I didn't want to do anything that would further give credence to that assumption. So yeah, it got really challenging to be outside of home because I was always trying to be on 100% of the time, which then, as you say, leads to depression because of the anxiety and who wants to feel like that all the time, who wants to feel anxious and sick and like they're never good enough all the time.
How does, like, how does the puberty and teen time is for you? Like, what's your memory of that period of time?
It was really challenging. It was really isolating. I felt like my friends were growing apart from me a little bit. There was a lot of bullying. I did have a really great core group of friends, but I felt like with them, we'd go to, say, an amusement park or something like that, and somebody inevitably would have to stay behind with me and walk slower because I couldn't navigate the stairs and obstacles as fast as everybody else could, but they'd always want to be running ahead so they could ride as many rides as they possibly could. But then, this poor unfortunate person would always get stuck behind, and so it made me not really want to do things and be social because I was really cognizant of the fact that I was slowing them down and I knew they were noticing it as well. They never said anything to me, but you just kind of No. So, yeah, it was a really isolating time. I was really fortunate in that I got into music at a really early age. My first album came out when I was 16, so that was kind of my refuge really from the teenage years would be to sit down at the piano and write songs and look for that human connection because then when my CD came out, I would be performing at concerts and things like that. And people would come up to me after the show and be like, I heard this song and it really meant a lot to me because I went through such and such a thing. So it was really finding that human connection through music and that universality of emotion.
How much how much does that helps you? You know, like how therapeutic that kind of, like the discovering that, like you have not only a passion for it, but like you must have been good at it. How much is that therapeutic for you?
Yeah, it was extremely therapeutic. It was also really great because the producer who I was working with um, connected me with some really fantastic other musicians and things like that. And they would be like a lot older than me. But for the first time, I felt like people were just treating me like a person. They didn't treat me like the musician who was blind. They just treated me like the girl who loved music. So that was incredibly positive in that way as well.
And how successful were you? Like how, like did it, like did it work? Was it something that you could, kind of perceive yourself or see yourself ahead in making a living out of?
Yeah, I think music's changed a lot since I started. I still am a musician. I still do work in music, but it's definitely become more challenging, especially with the pandemic. There was no live performance opportunities for like two
Yeah.
years and even getting together with to record with people. So that was really challenging. So I did put out 3 albums since I started, and we're actually just wrapping up a fourth one now. So
Are you still, so you still are having fun doing it?
yeah, yeah, I like it a lot. There was time as I got sicker as the pandemic neared and my mental health struggles became more apparent. I would be like standing up on stage and just thinking to myself like I don't want to do this shit anymore. Um just really going through the motions and I actually stopped playing music at all a couple months before the pandemic because it just didn't feel like it was fair to myself or my audience. And I remember one day standing up on stage. It was an outdoor festival. It was freezing cold. It was raining and just really going through the motions. And then all of a sudden thinking to myself, I don't have to do this. And it was such a relief. So, in a way, that was kind of positive for me with the pandemic is that there wasn't a lot of performance opportunities. So, it actually gave me a chance to step back from music and really reevaluate what I want from music.
And bring me back, like you said, like until, like kind of the shit at the fan moment. Can you bring me back like a few months, weeks? Like what happened? Like what is the circumstances of, like kind of that crisis happening?
Yeah, so I've had major depressive episodes since my early teens. So, some months or years are great and then others really aren't. And, I went to university, traveled around, lived abroad, and things would be good and then they wouldn't be. And then in, I guess, November of 2018, I entered into a major depressive episode that didn't end like the other ones had, and it just went on and on for months, and I got sicker and sicker, and I stopped eating, I stopped sleeping, and I made an emergency appointment with my doctor, and he adjusted my medication. He made sure I was getting more consistent mental health care supports outside of outpatient, and things were improving, and then the pandemic hit and it was like everything was out of control. I couldn't control anything. Um, the only thing I really could control is in my thoughts how and when I was going to die. And during all those major depressive episodes, something that always kept me going was like these survival goals. Like, I can't kill myself until I take this trip to Mexico, or I can't kill myself until my best friend comes to visit one more time. So it would always be like these things that I was working towards. And then as soon as they were over, I would try to find something else to work towards so I could keep going a little bit
Were
longer.
you
But then,
sharing that with anyone?
no, not really. No.
Okay.
But
Sorry.
when the
Like, I
pandemic
didn't wanna
hit,
cut you off. Yeah. I didn't wanna cut you off, sorry.
no, no worries. Then, the pandemic comes, nobody, as we talked about before, had any clue what was going on. It was just complete chaos. We didn't know how long it was gonna last. So all of those survival goals were really put on hold because I didn't know when I would be able to do any of those things. So it just got to the point where it was like, well, what's the point? There was no point. Everything's out of control. I'm gonna choose a time and a place to die.
And what happened? Jeez, he's like, that's kind of, like, the ultimate extreme, right? Like, that
Yes.
there's no looking back. What happened then?
So I got all my affairs in order. I made all my arrangements. And the day before I was planning to die, I had made, actually, way back when I first started with the therapist I was seeing at the time, I had made a safety plan with him, which is basically like you have two columns, and one column is signs that I'm spiraling, the other column is what to do with these different signs. So, call this friend, try distracting myself with, meditation or whatever. And the very last thing on that list was, if all else fails, go to the hospital. So I was like, you know, I I wasn't interested in getting better at all, but I decided to go to the hospital really seeking absolution, not to get better, but I figured it would be easier for my family and friends when I was gone to look back at my last days and kind of go, well, she tried, she went to the hospital. And so I expected that they would just, I would go there and they'd be like, "Oh, you're fine, go home." And then I could continue on with my plans. But that obviously didn't end that way. I was admitted as an involuntary patient.
What was your reaction to that?
It was, at the time, I think I viewed it more as an inconvenience, and I figured, "Oh, I'll get out, the most they can hold me is 24 hours or whatever. I'll get out tomorrow and then I'll be able to do it," which no, they held me until there was, one night I was lying awake in bed. I couldn't sleep because they were adjusting all my medications and things like that, and there was this patient that was brought in by air ambulance in critical condition, and as soon as they arrived, there was a code blue that was called, and I was lying there and I started thinking about the patient's family and friends and thinking, "My god, their loved ones must be having one of the scariest nights they've ever known." And then I started thinking, "How can I feel so much compassion and empathy for their loved ones when I know the choice I want to make will devastate my own?" And then I started thinking about the patient and thinking, this person, like, what a juxtaposition. This person is fighting to live and I'm fighting to die, and I have a choice in this. And if I choose to live, it was like I had to make a choice in that moment. I was either going to bide my time until I could get out and then I would die, or I could choose to live and write my book, share my story through music, through the book, through talks, and all of that sort of, um
All
like,
fell into place.
yeah, yeah, it all kind of, like you said, fell into place, and I was able to make something positive out of what was a really difficult situation.
And just probably find a calling.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Find that purpose, what moving through that pain and turning that pain into a purpose.
Whew. And, um, was there, like, was there, like, kind of like the chemical imbalance, like, were you asked to take, like, some prescription stuff, like, or, like were you, like, do you think that has helped and kind of rebalance things in your brain?
Yeah, I think like I went into the hospital on medication. They made a lot of adjustments to it when I was in the hospital because it obviously wasn't working at the doses and the specific medications that I was taking. So they've kind of played with it a little bit out of the hospital as well. They kind of it's one of those things that it's like you never seem to find they're always making, like, these little adjustments because,
Yes.
things change and life changes, and I think it has been helpful. I think, if somebody hasn't taken medication before, there's kind of this view of it like, "Oh, you just take a pill and everything's better," and it's not. Sometimes it's just the little kick that you need to be able to actually function in therapy and be able to work through some things because without it you're just practically comatose. So it's not like you take this pill forever and everything's great. It's a
There's
lot more
nothing
work than
instant.
that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
there's nothing instant, and there's no magical pills.
No,
Um,
no, there really aren't. And it's also individualized and trial and error with the psychiatric meds.
do So, like you get that. Did you get that realization while you were in the hospital still?
The like
Kind of
the
the
part about
realization that, like, are finding your, like, your that calling, or that, like, that purpose.
Yeah,
Were you
yeah, it was
still,
that
yeah?
same night that the person was brought in by air ambulance that I really realized all that, so it was kinda like one of those moments that I guess we get a couple times in our lives where everything is just super clear, but then things actually got, believe it or not, worse before they got better because all of a sudden I think I'd been so just going through the motions and everything in the hospital and just doing whatever the doctors and nurses said, but I wasn't really caring. I was just waiting to get out. And then when I actually started being an active participant in my treatment plans and things like that, stuff started to hurt.
What started to hurt?
Just all the traumas and everything. I remember the day after that realization, I went to group therapy, which is really an interesting thing in a hospital setting because there's so many different needs in the
Yeah.
psychiatric unit. You have your confused patients, you have people who are suicidal, you have people who are struggling with substance use. Like there's just a little bit of everything. So they're trying to cater to all these different needs in a group therapy setting, and it just like really doesn't work. So one of the guys who was in the group therapy made a comment that was really upsetting for me, and I went back to my room and it just everything kind of hit all at once. I've been numb for so long that all this emotion just, I've never felt so much grief. I don't think such profound grief in my life. And I laid there and I cried. And in the end, they ended up sedating me because there was just we weren't going to get anywhere that day. They tried to work through it with me and it was just like beyond that point. So they sedated me. And I just remember thinking the last thought I had before I was fully sedated was, this isn't how my life was supposed to go.
And so when you wake up from that, um, like, was there, like, anything, um, like, what could you do? Like, like, did you have any, kind of, like, how did you proceed to get better?
So I think that kind of initial grief sort of wore off that day, and then I was actually able to work through things with the psychiatrist and the psychiatric nurses. So basically, you have one appointment every day with. This is how it worked at the hospital I was in. I'm sure it varies depending on the hospital and the treatment plan and everything, but I would have one meeting with the psychiatrist when he would do his rounds, one meeting a day, and then the psych nurses basically acted as the counselors or the therapists, and they would do little almost impromptu sessions, maybe 15 or 20 very short therapy sessions throughout the day. So it was very intensive, but it wasn't, when you're doing outpatient, you're often sitting there for like an hour or whatever. In therapy, these sessions could be like as short as 10, 15 minutes. And it's just, these constant reminders of cognitive behavioral therapy and, mindfulness of forming better coping mechanisms. Um, yeah, just really working on better, I guess, ways to be more resilient.
Yeah. I mean, yeah. And, like, again, like, um it's how it's this perception that's, like, you can control, like, so that's what, yeah, I mean, there's no other way, like, so, um like, there are things that you can't control, there are things that you cannot change, but it really is based on the perception, like, that, like, how do you perceive and how do you react to it? um yeah, like, it's my wife
Yeah.
and I have, like, a lot of conversation around that, like, it's what can you control, like, so if you can't control it, like, there's nothing much you can do, like, you need to kind of accept it and, like, and move on and, be like, resilient. But, like, like, it's sometimes I feel that, like, we overuse that term, but, like, it's
Yes.
like, there is definitely resilience through that, in that, but
Yes.
it's not, sometimes some people would say, like, well, fuck off, like,
Yeah.
like, it's, you know, fuck your resilience, and,
Yeah,
and,
yeah, exactly. I remember talking to one of the psychiatrists in the hospital about the theory of radical acceptance. And he said to me, maybe part of your healing while you're here is accepting that you are here and you're blind to show people what it is to overcome adversity. And I said to him, I don't, who gets to decide that that's my purpose? But what I was actually thinking is, well, I never asked to be anyone's fucking inspiration.
exactly, like,
Yeah, so
so,
it's anger,
like,
I think, at first.
yeah, like, it, and, like, there might be a calling through that, but, like, you may not want to take the fucking call, so,
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
there's a calling here, yeah, but, I'm not picking up, like, fuck you, like, I don't want that, like, and so, like, you can fight it up for a while, and, like, there's really something that, and if it, it has to do you good, like, that's the other thing, like, so, like, if it does, like, until it does you good, it is,
Yeah,
like, you can't understand why, um like, it is such a calling, or it is such a purpose, like, it has to be good and do good on both sides.
yeah,
um
yeah, and I wasn't in the headspace to hear it, and, I reflected on it a lot because all you all you have in there is time to sit there and think, and I reflected on it, and I was kinda like, "Well, you know what? Yeah, to a certain extent, that's true because I can't control people's reactions to me. If they wanna see me as, this inspiring little snowflake or whatever, then I mean, I guess that's up to them. I can't change that. So I may as well not spend so much time and energy worrying about it and fighting against it.
how long does it take before you actually, um kind of embrace that?
I think it's I think I'm still working on it every day. I think you never get to a point where it's like a finish line and you're like, "Okay, I'm totally cool with this. I'm embracing it now." It's something I have to remind myself of every single day and, some days I'm a lot better at it than others.
Yeah. And, like, what do you decide of the, how you gonna do that, like, in terms of, like, when you find that, like, purpose and calling, and, like, what's your game plan from there?
Yeah, I think for me, it was accepting it and then accepting the parts that I could have control over. So, educating people isn't a bad thing when it's done on my terms. So I don't want somebody to come up to me in the grocery store and go, "What's it like to be blind?" Which they do all the time. And it's like, well, what's it like to be sighted? I don't know. Um, but I think education is important if it's done on my terms. So, writing the book.
I'm sorry,
Um,
Heather. Do people really come to you, strangers, and ask you that question?
all the time. Yes.
What the fuck?
Yeah, yeah, or
It's
they don't talk to me directly if I'm with somebody else, they'll be like, "Oh, you're so wonderful for taking care of her," or if we're at a restaurant, the waitress will be like, "Oh, what does she want to eat?"
oh my god. Yeah, well, like, how does it feel to be blind? Well, how does it feel minding your fucking business?
Exactly, or like, "Oh, were you born that way?" And I always wanna be like, "Were you born stupid?"
Yeah,
Like,
I mean, there really is something about, like, the intrusion of intimacy and, like, private lives, like, that I don't understand, like, there's, um I don't know what to say, like, I'm sorry for humanity, like, so
yeah, it's just nobody's right to know, and I think sometimes people feel this weird entitlement that they have. They wanna know, so they feel like they should be able to ask the question. They might be the 5th person who's
yeah.
asked me the same damn question today,
And
but they
that
don't
not
think of
like, my son is on the spectrum, right? Like, and he's only 6, like, so there's, it still is, um for people, like, at 6 years old, and he's tiny. So
Mhm.
we're still in that margin of people, there's something awkward about it, right? Like, where people, like, they can't really ask because, like, he's all here, like, there's very little speech impeachment, like, there's kind of some challenges, like, in his speech and, like, in some of the comprehension, obviously on some of the social codes. But, like, we're still at that awkward point. But, like, I can't imagine, like, in a few years, like, even maybe in 1 year, like, that people will try to, like, like, how is it, like, I'm gonna lose my shit, like, I'm just gonna, I guess I'm gonna be punching a lot of people in their face, but, like, that's just me. Uh,
Yeah. No, there's
because,
some days where it just gets to be too much, and you're always expected to be willing to answer questions and to never be having a bad day or, for people to interrupt you. I remember people like, I had a guide dog for a while. I retired her actually kind of because of this, because people would come up like, well, I was sitting in a restaurant having dinner with my friends and be like, "Oh, talk to me about your guide dog. How old is she? What's her name? What's her breed?" And I'm like, how does this is this really going to change your day to know these things? Like, if you don't
wow.
need to know, you don't need to know. So I think, yeah, it'll be kind of the same with your son. The people who know, and the people who don't know don't need to
I'm
know, and they
training an
shouldn't be
assist
asking.
I'm actually training an assistance dog, and, there's a lady that comes here every Monday, and she goes at stores and shops and all that,
Yeah.
with my dog. And every single time she comes back, she's like, "You have no idea how much I need to fight off people from petting her,
Yes.
interacting with her." Like, I'm like, "Are you kidding me?" Like, we're in 2021. Like, haven't we learned, like, that
I
you
know,
can't.
it's ridiculous.
It is crazy. Like, it's
Yeah.
just like, "Hello, doggy, doggy." I'm like, "What the fuck? Have you not understood?" And, like, I didn't know about that. I I literally didn't know that people were that dumb
Oh, yeah,
until,
no, it's a thing.
until I started that and went on YouTube and saw literally compilation of horror story with assistance dogs.
Yep.
A
Yep.
and just people petting the dog, uh, calling the dog off,
Yep.
kicking the individuals with their, like, their assistance animal out of, stores. I'm like,
Yes.
"What?" Like, anyway, so it's just, And in Canada, it still is unclear. Like we have very little, except for I think for um, blind dogs, especially in Quebec. There's one organization that pretty much has like the old monopole. Like they're monopolistic about like
Yeah, the
the
Mira
blind
Foundation.
exactly.
Yeah,
And because of that, it kind of like blocks the way for other organization to develop assistance dogs that are certified and recognized.
yeah,
Um, and so, beside like Mira should have, well, they do have, um, like dog that could be trained for special needs kids, such as like autistic kids,
yep,
but they're so over. There's so many requests that like they can't suffice the demand. So when I reached like when I reached out to them, they literally told me, well, basically told me to fuck off. Like not only that they couldn't help me, but couldn't even recommend somewhere that I could get help from. Um,
yeah,
and so I was like, okay, well, thanks a lot, but like, is there, and like the actually just no response. Like they're like, well, we can't do anything about this. I'm like, okay, and so I turned and like started making some research and realized that like there aren't any official laws in Canada around like assistance dogs and
no, there's nothing national, it's up to each province, so we don't have like in the US, they have the ADA, which covers service
yeah.
dogs, we don't have that.
And BC actually is in the better position than we are, which for just for example, the tests that the organization that I reach out to that are they're like that they're the ones helping me train the dog. Um, they inspired their tests from some quote unquote official test that BC
Yeah,
has, and so they copied that, and they're like, okay, so if your dog passed that test, we're gonna actually um, kind of certify your dog as an assistance dog, even though it almost has no way in. Like that. Like if a shop decides that you can't come in, like you're pretty much dead in water. Even like even the vest is actually someone in Canada that she does the vest, but like there's nothing official around that. Like so I could have I could have done the pink dotted, like with like some Disney characters,
oh, totally, yeah,
material on, and it call this a vest, and that would be it. Like so, yeah, it's unfortunate, really
yeah,
unfortunate.
yeah, and you can file a human rights complaint if you do get denied service, but they rarely go anywhere, it's just yeah, it's a shame the state of the service dog situation here, and BC, yeah, it's weird because it has that there's that test, but then you have these certification cards that you're supposed to carry everywhere, and there's 2 problems with that. 1, I don't want any person who comes up and asks to see it to necessarily have my name. Like, I don't know who they are. I don't know if they're actually from the place of business. And 2, if you're coming, like, I had a friend who was coming here last minute for a funeral from Alberta with her guide dog. She didn't have time. You're supposed to apply online beforehand and everything to get this temporary, I guess, certification for out of province. She didn't have time to do any of that and she was denied service here. So, yeah, I don't know.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
It really is crazy.
Yeah.
Um, what like what did you decide to like to do from that point on? Like in terms of like helping others. Like helping. Um, like especially since you told me that like you felt it was a bit of your purpose. What was like how did you embarked on that journey actually?
So I think the big thing was actually writing the book and really kind of trying to answer that question that people always ask of what is it like to be blind? So hopefully they'll stop asking me because there's not really that much literature, I guess, on it. And then combined with the mental health stuff, the second half of the book really talks about being hospitalized for psychiatric care and what that actually looks like, trying to pull back that curtain on it because I think people, hear about it and they think, one flew over the cuckoo's nest or whatever, or girl interrupted, I don't know. And, that uncertainty, that unknown creates a lot of fear.
The and like are so you it almost just started, right?
Yeah. Yeah, just as soon as I got home, probably a week after getting out of the hospital, I just opened up my laptop and started to write.
Wow. How's it going so far?
It's good. The book came out a couple months ago and it's been super positive. I wasn't really sure how it was going to be received. There was a lot of sleepless nights because, when you're writing a memoir, you're writing about people who are still alive, whose stories have intersected with yours. So there's that to consider. There's the whole stigma around mental health, around suicide, around disability that I just didn't know how people would respond to. But I've actually been fairly, pleasantly surprised. It's definitely been different than releasing music because when I released any of my albums, it's like family and friends are all over it. They're sharing it on social media all the time. They're listening to it. They're sending me messages about how much they enjoy it. When the book comes out is a little bit different. People are a little more hesitant, or they read the book and they don't quite know what to say. They don't really want to share it with their friends. So that kind of shows me that it was actually an important thing to do because clearly we do have work to do around and breaking that stigma.
And what is the book called?
It's called Holding On by Letting Go.
And where can people find you? Like like this is like always the question that like I get asked a lot. Like like from my like the people listening. Where can people find you online?
Yeah, they can go to my website. It's www.heather-hutchison.com, Hutchison. And on that site, there's links to my book. It's available on Amazon, Audible, basically anywhere you buy books. It's available in print, ebook, and audiobook. And as well on that website, there's links to all my music, my Spotify, Apple Music. Um, all my social media and everything. So it's very easy to connect from that one place.
And so for anyone that listens, you just scroll down. It's in the description of like the of the episode. Like no need to um pause or anything. Like it's right below. Um, Heather, really thank you for your time. Like I
Thank
had a
you so much.
blast uh hearing your story. And so happy that like like you found not only a calling but like kind of a reason and reasons to live. Like it's fucking worth it.
Yeah, yeah, it's totally worth it. That's what I always tell people. You might not feel like it right now, but if you stick it out, there will come a day where you'll stop in a moment and you'll feel so much joy and you'll think to yourself, I would have missed this. So it's totally worth it to hang on for that moment.
Yeah, it is. And really I really enjoyed the conversation. And I wish you success with the book and success with anything that you actually like that you start off in projects and all. Like really
Thank
with
you.
your career and your artistry. Like all of that. Like I wish you the best, Heather. Really.
Thank you so much. Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you for your time. Take care.
You too.
Bye bye.
Bye.